Hello, and welcome to Crushing Classical, redefining a thriving classical music career. This episode is brought to you by Fix Music. If you're looking for high quality sheet music and to purchase it on a beautiful website, truly, this is the most attractive sheet music website I've ever seen. You should look no further than fixmusic.com. That's F-I-C-K-S music.com. They even went so far as to have a YouTube video of a performance of the music you want to buy. So when you're browsing around, you can hear the piece before you even buy it. I just think it's a great idea. So I've never even seen that on any other music website before. They currently have a great selection of high quality string, piano, and chamber music repertoire at affordable prices. And keep in mind, if you do play another instrument other than strings or piano, you can get in touch with them through their website and they'll do their best to get that music for you. And just for Crushing Classical listeners, if you order now, you can use the code CRUSH for 10% off your order. Check them out at fixmusic.com. So, Crushing Classical is all about creating your classical music career. In my original interview series, I interview musicians who are currently creating unique and interesting careers outside the traditional job path. And in addition to the original series, we have two new series on this podcast. Our Fireside Chat series, where my new partner, Eileen Gordon, and I are finally recording the mind-blowing conversations we have been having for over a year now as I learn about the business world and how musicians are, how would you say this, behind the curve in this area. We dive in and talk about all things money, career strategy, and so much more. You are going to love this series. Each Sunday, there is a new episode available to you on the Fireside Chats. We also have the Hot Seat episodes coming out every 2 weeks on Fridays. Tune in to hear musicians who want to explore income streams in a hot seat business coaching situation with Eileen and hear them explore ways to turn their unique skills and abilities into an income stream. If you're interested in getting on one of these episodes, send me a private message on my Facebook page, facebook.com/crushingclassical. On this episode, I interviewed Leo Flynn and James Curtis from CMH Label Group, a record label based in Los Angeles. So why am I interviewing record label executives? I was looking around for musicians that I could interview on Crushing Classical, and I found this quartet called Vitamin String Quartet. As I looked into it, I saw that they had recordings and even sheet music of their arrangements of pop songs, and they were really popular on social media. I wanted to know all about this string quartet and how they came up with their idea. And it turns out what they did was create a series of projects and name it Vitamin String Quartet. So essentially, these guys are job creators in the classical world, which is not normal. So I definitely wanted to interview them. I just love their ideas and their creativity, and I wanted to find out what they're up to and what else they have coming up in their lineup of projects. Let's get started. Hey, Leo and James, how are you?
Hey, I'm well. How are you?
Great.
Yeah, good here.
Great to have you here. So, I wanted to have you guys on the podcast today because as I was looking around for musicians who are doing interesting and unique things in their careers, I happened to find Vitamin String Quartet, and I was under the impression that it was an existing just group, like a string quartet that has the same makeup and that they were a touring group or whatever. And I after I contacted you and talked to Leo, I found out more about your project. So will you guys tell me more about what Vitamin String Quartet is?
Sure.
Yeah,
I'll,
I think Leo. Yeah.
I'll lead off. So, Vitamin String Quartet, yes, not a quartet per se or in a traditional sense, but rather a series of string quartet projects, all involving string quartets, but a series of string quartet projects, and that ranges from studio albums to online videos to live performances, sheet music. And we work at a record company. James and I are part of the team that produces Vitamin String Quartet. And we work with many different players and arrangers and producers and other creatives on each of these projects that we concept and develop and then go produce and put out into the world.
Great. That sounds fun. So, James, were you going to say something about it?
No, yeah, that's pretty much, Leo pretty much hit the nail on the head there. The one thing that I will add to that is that, the bulk of what Vitamin String Quartet does, these projects are based around us doing string quartet arrangements or performances of modern music, pop, rock, sort of anything that fits that bill of modern popular music, and that's what we do here.
For sure, yeah.
Great. So, how did you get started with that idea? I know that you're a record label. So, tell me more about where you're coming from, your background.
James, maybe you could speak to the genesis of it.
Yeah, I mean, really, it started as a subsidiary label. The parent company is CMH Records, which started out in the 70s as a bluegrass label. But when the owner passed away and the son took over, David Harley, who's the current owner, when he took over, he started to expand the kind of repertoire and the catalog beyond just bluegrass. And he was, at that point, really honing in on a lot of different sort of tribute ideas. And one of the ideas that got bandied about was this idea of doing string quartet tributes to rock and pop music, mostly rock music at the time. And it started as a studio project in late 1999. The first record was a tribute to Led Zeppelin, and then shortly after that, we put out a tribute to REM. And we did that basically as a succession of tribute albums, string quartet tribute to, strung out on. We played with different titlings and themes, but really it was just a series of string quartet tributes. And then around 2006, 2007, we were starting to ready the catalog to be put up for digital commercial release. So this was around the times when we started selling stuff on iTunes. And we thought it would be a really good idea to find a kind of umbrella to house all of these disparate releases under. And so we thought, well, maybe we'll come up with an artist name, which was the easiest way to do it. Instead of trying to come up with an album series name, we thought, once people discover, say, String Quartet Tribute to Metallica on iTunes, we want to give them the ability to click on the artist and then find all these other tributes in that series of releases. So after a lot of discussion, we wound up calling it Vitamin String Quartet, namely because the label was Vitamin Records. We thought it just sounded right to call it Vitamin String Quartet, kind of rolled off the tongue. So in about 2007, everything got kind of collected under that umbrella as a sort of generic artist name. And then it just kind of took on a life of its own at that point. We started seeing fans pop up online talking about Vitamin String Quartet as an entity, as a thing. In fact, the fans were the first ones to abbreviate it. We now use kind of VSQ as the kind of go-to nomenclature in a lot of ways on the albums and social media and the sheet music packages, what have you. But that really started because we saw people in social media and online in our comments talking about VSQ, VSQ, VSQ. And it was around that time that Leo and I were also really looking to make a unified kind of sound, because at that point there had been so many different project coordinators and so many different people producing these records that it went through a long period where a lot of different attempts had been made to try different sounds and additional elements. And Leo and I, after just sitting there listening to these, talking about it and what we liked about the music, we decided to kind of keep it more organic, more stripped down. We wanted the albums to sound more like, 4 players in a room, as opposed to a lot of overdubs or unnecessarily needed After Effects or extra instrumentation that didn't make sense. And that's kind of where we're at now. We've just sort of expanded on top of that with some real direction moving forward.
That's really cool. So is it doing well? You sell lots of records?
Yeah, Leo, I'd say we still sell quite a few records. the marketplace has definitely changed. We sell some physical still, especially because now we've actually started to sell vinyl. We've started making exclusive vinyl releases, and really the last bastion of the physical marketplace is physical. But we have an incredible number. I don't have it off the top of my head. We have an incredible number of monthly listeners and subscribers on Spotify. We still sell a lot of downloads on iTunes, and we're still quite successful just as a studio entity. It's still doing really well.
Yeah, for whatever numbers are worth, I think sometime last year we crossed 250 million streams across all streaming platforms, and I know that we have over 3 million downloads as far as that format goes, and over 1 million CDs sold in that format. So we've hit some great milestones in terms of the records.
Wow. So you really are job creators in the classical genre, really, even though you're focusing on pop and rock, you're employing classically trained musicians. So that's fascinating to me. Where do you see it going in the future? Do you see tours or more live performances?
We hopefully there's a lot of things to come. We're live performances are something that we started to delve into 5 or 6 years ago now.
About 6 years.
Yeah, and in response to again fans, especially the ones online, and reaching out to us and letting us know that they wanted to see us perform. See VSQ perform, and it just being an album series and we just being a record company, at first maybe that didn't compute. We did what we did, and how would we ever tackle that? But as it kept going, that interest kept going, we thought that we would take the plunge and try a few dates. And since then, we've done a number of what we think were very successful performances, and we hope there will be more. It's something that we continue to experiment with and put together, kind of on a kind of a longer timeline where we want to. James used the word organic. This is a rotating cast of players. There's lots of folks involved, lots of different combinations of people and chemistries. And one of our challenges, but one of the really unique things about it is everyone getting time together and building that chemistry and making VSQ real. The people who play on the records and do the live performances, that we, even though it's not a quartet, we all come together as a family and have a shared voice and aesthetic and message and music. And so we've been at work on that in the studio, in rehearsals, for our performances, for the online videos. And so we're focused on that time together, and we hope that that's just creating possibilities for all kinds of things more and more down the road, including performances. We're doing these new music workshops where we go and we have different combinations of players come in, work on new charts with the arrangers and maybe soon composers and some original compositions. And maybe we can build it out into, kind of intimate performances, maybe even master classes. So right now we're focused on bringing everyone together and working on music and just creating more and more chemistry and possibilities. So we like to think all these things are in the future for us.
What I love about this is it's almost like you went about it in a backwards, like in reverse order, not backwards, but reverse order of what typically people do who are starting an ensemble, because they have their ensemble and then they're like, okay, now I'm making recordings, I'm doing performances, this, and I'm building an audience. But you came out with the music and the albums and built the audience around that, and now you're building, the relationships came out of that, and now you're building other things. It's interesting to hear the progression of it. You know what I mean? Like it's different from a lot of other people who start an ensemble and then move forward.
Yeah, you could almost frame it like here's this name. Really, you could just look at it as a name, which is, there's a lot of records out under that name, and a lot of traction and relationship built with consumers already. But there's that name, and yes, essentially, if we want to do more things, we have to kind of step backwards to a place where you can then, you know what you are, who's involved, what your message is, and get clear on all that so that you can then turn and go in these different directions. So yeah, it's been a really, for me, fascinating process. I think for everyone. I mean, definitely frustrating at times, but I think it's almost like it's solving a riddle, right?
Yeah, totally.
How does this thing make the leap from a concept to a living, breathing entity, right, James?
Yeah, I mean that's kind of the one thing we always struggle with is like, well, what is the story? And a lot of times people would ask us like what kind of story we're telling. And, we did have to struggle with that for a while, because the perception that we definitely saw at first was you put these things up there, people see them as if there's some kind of an artist behind them. And there's definitely artistry, but it's not, again, as we've established, a string quartet as people kind of understand it. Mm-hmm. And we struggled with that for a long time, this conundrum of just like, would people even want to know how these things are made, why we make them, and really take it from the approach of, this really kind of starts here at the label with like Leo and I. All the A&R, all the aesthetic, everything really kind of starts with us. And then, we have the people that we work with, the arrangers, the performers, producers and arrangers tend to be one and the same, not always. But I mean, so when you're going out there and you're trying to basically not dissuade people of the notion that there are players involved, because there's definitely players involved. But you kind of struggle with this idea of like, is this boring for people to really kind of realize that, it's label folks then working with producers and arrangers, working with players in whatever form or shape that we're working in at any given time, whether, again, like Leo said, if that's the studio release, if that's these sheet music titles, and or the occasional live or one-off performance, and then sort of just filling in the blanks for people so that we're being kind of as true to the process as possible without sort of getting lost in the morass of just what it takes to make a project and keeping people engaged. I think that's always been the big thing, is what is the story, and are we comfortable telling that story? And that's kind of the place that we're at now.
Yeah, it's a big story.
Yes, it's huge.
And we've had to figure out, we're still in the process of figuring it out and how to tell it, and that it's meaningful for people. And I think what we're finding is, okay, so it's not a set quartet, and there's different players that come and go. But the beauty in that is that it can be more inclusive, more that we can exhibit more players, different, more varied creativity and chemistry. And we like to think of VSQ, as much as anything, as a platform to exhibit those great players, so that it's a vehicle for them. It's a vehicle for itself and our creative team, but also the players and the creatives. And it can just be this musical world that everyone comes into and collaborates and makes cool things, and it's connected to an audience, and we can deliver things, and these musicians not just have the gigs, but have that profile, have that exposure, and be able to really reach out to people and play for them and connect with them.
Yeah, I just find this so fascinating. As I listen, I think the story, your viewpoint, you're saying it's been a process to figure out how to tell the story. But what I'm hearing is that, wow, hearing this story for what it really is and what your process has been can be so helpful to musicians everywhere who want to start their own career, because this is a completely different kind of approach. You're approaching it. I mean, you're not musicians, correct? Maybe you're musicians, but are you classical musicians?
Well,
Leo, you want to go first?
Sure. I am a musician. I have a music background. I'm not a classical musician, not classical background. More of a rock guy, electric bass. But in my role at CMH, I don't have a musician role. So I can kind of see both sides of it, which is great and really helpful. And James?
Yeah, I too studied music, but I am not classically trained per se. My background in music really kind of started doing musicals and choir, and at a certain point I became a percussionist, and I did study the slightest bit of music theory in high school, but it kind of stopped at a certain point because initially my interest was more in film than anything else. And that was the path I was on until my early 20s. But my role here has always been kind of like professional music lover / music geek. And that's where it kind of comes from. It's that indelible interest in all music that informs what I do here. But yeah, no, I wouldn't even call myself a musician now, even though I have a drum set in my house and I still sing every once in a while. I would never wear that mantle proudly. That's just not something I'm comfortable saying.
But yeah, so. Tracy, I think to your point, well, we're glad if it's helpful. It's nice to hear that. I think there was a big process for us just coming to grips with that. This is what's going on. This is the story. Just tell it, and the faster we can do that, the faster we get to the meat of it, which are the players and the music making, and but we almost had to step back and just clean your lenses and see that this could be an interesting story, or at least a helpful one, like you're saying, and offer up some ideas to us to start with, just to keep this thing going in the direction it needs to, as to how to move it forward, and maybe some ideas for anyone who's watching it all along, how to make music and put music out into the world and reach people with it. There's so many considerations and things to take on, from the business end to the artistic end to the balance between the two. How do you balance your time? How do you what do I have to worry about? Is it licensing, technology, all these things that a lot of them are really interesting. Even as a musician, they can be really interesting. And my experience with musicians have been that they can be very entrepreneurial and are very interested in what tools are available to them, and can be some of the earliest adopters of tools and technology and ways to get their stuff out there. They're highly motivated. So we think that in addition to putting some great music out there, we're hoping that we're also putting out a good message about going for it, that there's not one way to do it. Even when it's unclear, as it has been for us, just keep going. And maybe at a certain point, you realize that the things that you're frustrated with, or maybe you feel dissatisfaction about, that's your story. Like, just step into it and be that. And that's your point of view and your place from which you can say things that will touch people, both in your story and what you do and the music that you make. All that stuff goes together, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. I love that perspective. So tell me, as record label people and as more rock musicians or people dealing with different genres other than classical, what's that like to work with classical musicians so closely? And what do you see about when you work with them? What's your impression of how the classical music world is adjusting to all the, new stuff? We have streaming now and all these other different things. And just, do you have a general impression about how classical musicians are keeping up or keeping on top of how to adjust to the real world or the current world?
James, I don't know, but I feel like a lot of our players are way ahead of us, or at least me. Sometimes I can be a little bit of a Luddite. I feel like a lot of the players that we work with are on top of a good amount of the technology and the ways to connect with people and how they keep themselves busy and gigging and paid and out there because they have to be. And we're LA based. Most of our musicians are LA musicians, and they are hustling there and connected and looking to connect more and stay dialed in. So I think, at least in terms of these musicians, maybe more to the point about classical musicians, that I think these guys, whether they come from like solidly classical background or not, these folks are definitely not just looking at the traditional channels and paths within classical music. Even if they came from that, and even if they still operate in that world, they are also working in other genres, teaching. They're online. They're out on tours with bands.
Oh.
They're working with us and wrestling with the creative tension between classical instrumentation and rock music, perhaps. Yeah. They're very open-minded and kind of on this cutting edge of taking all that incredible historically infused technique into this blank canvas, this Wild West. And so I think our players are exemplary in that way of keeping things really open.
That's great. That's really great. So knowing this, do you see something different for the classical genre going into the future, like in general, or what's your viewpoint knowing that about the musicians that you work with as far as going forward with the classical genre in general?
I think we need to work on bringing down all the false dualities that we put out there, like this is classical, this is not. Right. Well, that's, to categorize things, but then to make them exclusive to me, I think we have to work on finding what's interesting about the other genre or the other side, taking what we do and connecting with that other thing and learning from it. And there's a give and take and creative tension there, and new cool things come from that. I think I mentioned this to you before, Tracy, but for a classical musician to arrive, or for an ensemble to arrive, for a piece of music to arrive, there's this vast world of training and knowledge and technique that has to go into it, and it's so hard to get there. It takes decades to get there, maybe for one performer. And so you start to understand why over time a genre like classical maybe, without trying to, can start to isolate itself to protect that process and to make sure that it remains whole, and that, in the year 3000, we can still play that symphony the way it was supposed to be played, and the integrity is fully intact. And I think there's a lot of discipline in that, and we have to respect that. But I don't think anyone can ever limit their logic to that. When you have all this other culture going on around it, musical culture that wants to engage, it wants to reach into that classical world with those instruments, those ideas, those musical concepts, that some of that dense, difficult, challenging stuff, and bring it out into the larger world and let it mix in with other music and create new things. And I'm interested what's in there, but I wouldn't want to confine myself in that world just to experience it. I want to be able to reach towards it and grab it, but also stay true to me and my, where I come from musically. And in the classical world, I see very interesting entities like the LA Phil. I think has been a great example in recent years of an institution that is trying to throw off all these preconceptions, any of the cliches about classical music, that it's it's just about these disciplines and the tradition and the institution. Throw all that out and start with make no assumptions. I mean, look at the building that they play in.
Right.
The Walt Disney Concert Hall. The whole message there is you've never experienced anything like this. You can't imagine what this is, right? To bringing in Dudamel, to their programming, to their marketing, their outreach with the Youth Orchestra of LA, kind of the way that they're using social media and technology. I think that's important for any creative entity, but particularly for classical music, where it can have that liability of isolating itself because it needs to preserve the history. But I think it has to rise to meet that challenge. I think an institution like the LA Phil seems to be doing that. I'm sure there are others, but that's one I'm mostly familiar with, to kind of address that. How do you stay relevant?
Exactly. It's a tough question in the classical world, and I think it needs to be addressed more often. So do you ever see, speaking of philharmonics and symphonies, do you ever see your projects branching out into larger ensembles like orchestras, full orchestra?
What do you think, James?
Is James there?
You may have.
I think James stepped out.
He stepped out, yeah. Well, I can answer that.
Okay.
It's very possible. We 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 have rock backgrounds, pop backgrounds for the most part. That's our point of view, and we are coming into the classical world as neophytes and learning and exploring. So I don't know that we have any particular designs within kind of classical music terms as to what we're doing. We're kind of happy to be experimenting, and the idea of VSQ performing with an orchestra or being expanded to an orchestra has come up in a variety of scenarios. We have partnered with Alfred Music. They have taken a handful of our string quartet arrangements and adapted them for string orchestra, which I know are available to middle and high school music educators for their programs, which we love. And yeah, there's that too is a possibility. There's been plenty of talks around larger ensemble projects, so I could see that coming together.
That sounds great. And you just mentioned sheet music. So you guys, I know you have several things like that on your website. You sell all the arrangements, or just selections of them?
It's a select titles. This is also something that our fans were asking us about for several years. And again, as a record company, we really didn't know what to do with that demand.
Yeah.
What should we try to also become a sheet music publisher? But we thought it was worth a shot. I myself have a rough idea of what a piece of music should look like. We're surrounded by amazing musicians and arrangers and composers and producers, and we have an incredible art department and layout people and packaging people, and we thought this is totally within us to do this, and we just thought it would be really neat. I myself always thought that music notation, sheet music, is a visually fascinating thing, just as a piece of handiwork. So we love the idea of offering that being part of our product line. So we went for it, and we really are only able to produce so much of that, and there's only a certain percentage of our catalog for which there's really strong demand to justify taking an arrangement all the way through the arranging, score prep, cleanup, reading with a live quartet, engraving, laying out, publishing, printing, through that whole process. There are only so many titles that we feel that that's really warranted for, but we're trying to do as many of them as we can, and we're proud to offer it.
Yeah, I would think that people would really want that, considering the lineup of music that you have, the popular music people would want to play for themselves if they have string quartets themselves. So
totally, yeah, we have, it's everything from VSQ listeners and fans are getting married, hiring a quartet for their wedding, and they want to outfit the quartet with some of our arrangements, or the gigging quartet, or could be high school music teachers. We love that we have something to offer all those folks.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking, because I imagine that you probably have a wide range of people in your audience who are not necessarily classical music lovers, but that they just love that music, and they found the string quartet version of it, and they think that's really cool, so.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, our audience is a popular music audience.
Yeah.
Finding our renditions of their favorite songs or artists and loving hearing their favorite music in this new light, and maybe discovering that they are attracted to this classical instrumentation or stringed instrumentation in a way that they never were or thought was possible. And it's opening their ears up to new possibilities, maybe some classical music. It's a discovery for them. It's exciting. It's enriching. It makes the music that they already love more fascinating. It's like, wow, this how is it that this song that I love can be transformed on these other instruments and give me a totally new experience? It's at the same time it's familiar. It's this whole other experience, and it opens up how music works a little bit, how powerful it is a little more to the non-musician, just to your average record listener. They have a deeply musical experience.
I agree. And what I think is so great about your project with Vitamin String Quartet is just that through the actual music that you're playing, the popular music, you're growing an audience that's a lot larger than the average classical musician or classical music listener audience would be. So you're growing this enormous audience, and then you have the opportunity to then show people what that ensemble sounds like through their music that they already like. That it kind of opens up potential projects for you too for doing classical pieces with with your ensembles. I see another Beethoven's Fifth coming out, like, remember that?
Yep. Yeah, and all that stuff is on our minds, and we're thinking through that, and how can we continue to expand and explore and make new connections, and who knows. But I love the idea of bringing these worlds together, bringing the different audiences together, bringing the music together, just the musical chemistry that's possible. I love when pop music can be challenging, and not for the sake of being challenging, but can be musically profound, right? That's just another level of emotion or concept or vision that you can achieve, right? Like Radiohead, for examples, we often perform Radiohead songs, and I think that's an example of a popular music that is informed at the level that classical music is. The consideration that goes into it, the detail, the depth, the musical depth, and I think if anything, we want to help create more of that, right? Where the popular music is also more meaningful, moving, inspiring.
Yeah.
And so that's what pop music can learn from classical music, and conversely, classical music can learn how to speak on all these different levels and to more people, and welcome them, guide them from where they are to those deeper levels, right? Don't project in there of being obtuse or difficult or exclusive, but rather taking them on a journey from where they are to some place really that changes them.
Yeah, that's great. I love it. So on my show, I always ask my guests about their defining career moment, and I want to know if you've had one. It's sort of like a screw this moment where you were, trucking along in your career, and you realize you could either keep going on the safe route or you could choose an unknown path. And I want to know if you had a moment like that and what it was.
I'm not sure I've had it in my professional life yet. Or at least I'd like to think that it hasn't happened, or maybe never will. I feel like I had that moment during my school years, because I had to. I was always a creative as a kid. I had my artistic interests, but I was also very, very much an academic kid, and there was a lot of potential in my academics and schooling, and taking maybe a quote unquote safer road professionally. And in my high school years and then into college, I got more and more serious about making music, and I could see more clearly how precious time is, and that whatever you choose to do with your life, it's, as you go into it and you get down the road, it's going to consume more and more of your time. And so you want to choose wisely. And I could see a lot of potential for regret in going and pursuing something that wasn't music. Mm-hmm. And even though that was a perhaps scary option, and I didn't know how that would end, or what that would look like, or where it would leave me, or if I had even had any business doing it, really. I just felt like I had to, or I would regret it. And I still feel like I'm kind of hurtling forward from that decision. I don't know if it was the smartest one. I may never know, but I at least have that peace of mind that I went for it. When I was in college, I did not start on the music track. I did not start at a music school. I was on a more traditional path, and maybe at that time avoiding what I wanted to do, what was in my heart, which was music. Uh-huh. And there came a point where it's like, I can't spend another year like this, just, with all this frustrated energy, projecting all this frustrated energy at the world, and not like really doing what maybe I'm supposed to be doing. So that's when I decided to put myself in the line of fire, and put together my audition tape for music school and send it in, and hope for the best. And that was probably my point. And I think I'm still going from that moment of just deciding to go for it.
Uh-huh. That's great. Is James back?
I am.
Hey, James. So I was just asking Leo about his career crossroads moment that I call the screw this moment, where you decided to go in a direction that was more unknown, as opposed to the safe, known route that you had already been on. And I want to know if you had a moment like that yet.
Well, like I said before, my whole sort of goal in life was making films. And I was in my early 20s, was working on different crews, doing PA work, film, television, et cetera, et cetera. And I wasn't making a lot of money. So, and jobs in film and television are really inconsistent. And so I was supplementing my income by working at different places: restaurants, video stores, record stores. And at a certain point, I was working part-time at this particular record store. And I was thinking, you know what? I feel more comfortable doing this than I feel doing anything else. And I sort of stepped up, because at that point I was only maybe working like 10, 15 hours a week at the record store. But I had already been tasked with things like buying certain stock for the store. Like I was basically, I started as a clerk and wound up becoming the buyer for all the underground hip hop and metal for the store, but I was still only doing like 10 to 15 hours a week. And I sort of said, the film thing is just not working. I can do that as a personal thing, but I really got to step up. and invest myself in something a little bit more wholeheartedly. And the music thing is kind of what, stepping up and doing that at the record store is what led me to where I am today. Because eventually I took a full-time gig working at this record store. And, I said, I want to basically be the number one buyer and promoter for this store, which was something they didn't really have. I took that on, and I sort of turned my back on what I'd been working on for many years. Originally I thought I was going to be working at a record store for the rest of my life. And we kind of all know what happened with record stores circa like 2006, 2007. And not only that, but the woman who was running the store at the time was kind of mismanaging things. And I thought, okay, well, I've had such good luck with being a buyer and a promoter. Maybe I just need to go to the next level and work at a label. And that's essentially how I kind of got to where I am today. So the turning point there was looking at the career I wanted and realizing that I had a career that I was excelling at, which was unexpected. Like getting into music was not the plan. Music was like a hobby. Music was something I loved, but I just, I didn't think anything about either as a performer or on the business side of things being involved with the music industry. So that was a big turning point in my career. I still love film and there's things that I love to do with it, but that was like the big thing, was turning my back on something I had really sort of invested on because I found something I was really good at.
Great. That's awesome. So
Yep.
It was kind of by happenstance, and then it worked out. So that's good.
Yeah, no, totally. I mean, that's exactly what it was. And my first label job was here at CMH, and I worked at another label sort of in between. I've had 2 tenures here. And the funny thing is even while I was working at the labels, I was still taking jobs working at other record stores. I was sort of booking bands on the outside, helping people sort of manage their marketing. I flirted with being a tour manager for a while. So it's just one of those things that just sort of fell into naturally. I used to sort of joke it was like I was failing upwards, because in my mind I was like, I'm not succeeding at what I wanted to do. I wanted to make film. Getting to music at first seemed kind of like a going down, but it's, now I look at it as just like, no, this is, I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing. This isn't failing upwards. This is where I'm supposed to be.
That's great. That's great.
Yeah.
So I have 2 more questions for the both of you. The first one is, what would you say your habit or behavior, if you have one, that you've developed over the years that has made a difference in your career so far, the most difference?
Wow.
Leo, you want to take that one first?
We could talk about habits to avoid. Which habits have slowed you down the most? Which habits are you succeeding despite of? I think just realizing that habits are really important. Making a habit of paying attention to your habits, because I think that is a whole wide, deep topic, and it's a particularly important one for musicians because there are so many facets to what they do and what they need to do. From practicing to marketing themselves. There's a very wide spectrum of habits to create and take care of. So I'd say just start with that. I mean, it's maybe a little glib, but you'll hear that said creativity itself is a habit, which is a really important thing to grasp hold of as early as possible. I think on the one hand, classical musicians get that often from a very early age on the training and practicing and instrumental side, right? Like if you don't practice every day, your playing falls behind, and you don't become or remain the musician that you want to be. But then I would maybe go a step further. If one of the things we're talking about here is how does classical music stay relevant? which is the other side of the coin is the creativity and the unexpected and the things that are not written in stone that you can't practice for an hour because they don't exist yet, and you have to go and create them. You got to dream them up and create them. But that isn't just going to visit you unexpectedly one day. You have to go after it. There has to be a habit of doing so, whether that's composing or you're creating a new way of interpreting established works, or you just want to create a new medium with your instrument, even if that's a classical instrument. You have to strike out and go for that thing. You got to do it kind of on a daily basis, and a lot of days it's going to fall flat and you might be dispirited, but you got to come back the next day and pick up the pieces, take the lessons on board, and move forward with it.
Great. I'd say that's great advice. What about you, James?
Yeah, something very akin to that. This for me, it was the idea of, like I said, being a professional music geek or music lover. For a long time, I was just a music geek or music lover. Mm-hmm. And so, like, just embracing that sense of openness, just sort of being open to things, whether that's things I'd never thought to try before, and not only personally, but just in my professional life. Like just trying and thinking, well, maybe that might not work, but what the hell, why not? And in line with that, also being open to mistakes. For me, growing up, I was so hard on myself that anything that didn't feel like it belonged, I would just sort of kind of berate myself. I still have that habit. Those things don't totally go away, but I learned to embrace mistakes, embrace happy accidents, especially when you start to really look and listen into the creation of rock and pop and modern music. So much of it was basically a reaction to classical rigidity. Mm-hmm. That, when you start to embrace those happy accidents, when you start to embrace that something went a little pitchy or something was off time, and you find the beauty in that whether that's when you're making music or creating a spreadsheet, that embracing those mistakes, embracing those happy accidents will really kind of help in a way that you weren't expecting, especially if you're kind of a control freak, which is where I was for a while. And I think what that kind of goes along with something that Leo was saying too, is something I was thinking about, is the idea of opening up the classical genre by having musicians who they have their classical training, but whether or not they just have their own interests as rock musicians, or they've worked with rock musicians, or they're younger cats, so maybe they were turned on to things that, like Vitamin String Quartet or other entities, sort of mixed rock and pop. They find a way of embracing things that don't necessarily gel with what you've been taught as a classical musician, but bringing those weird or happy accidents or mistakes into the fold to create something that's a little different, a little off kilter. That's one of the big ones for sure.
That's cool. James, you keep referring to yourself as a professional music geek, right? And the fact that you've worked in record stores, it makes me think of that movie High Fidelity. Are you like Jack Black from High Fidelity?
Yeah, that's not too far off, to be quite honest. I was working, and I'd read that book before the film came out, and then when the film came out, I was working, I was at the peak of working at an independent record store, and we were taking people to that film and just sort of sitting there kind of nodding along. I've tried to, especially because I had such horrible interactions with record store clerks when I was a kid, I strive to not be as elitist as some of those cats were in that movie, or as elitist as you see in a lot of independent record stores.
Yeah.
But everybody's a bit of a snob, to be quite honest. But for sure, there are definite habits, definite fixations, fetishizations of certain film or art or music or something that just kind of goes along with that. And so, watching that film, you just kind of sit there and shake your head like, yep, yeah, I'm either that guy or I know that guy or I know that guy.
And after this interview, I feel like I have to watch that movie tonight. That's one of my favorite movies anyway, and I kind of forgot about it. So it's such a great movie.
Oh yeah, it's a blast. It's so much fun.
Such a good one. And it took place in Chicago, which is where I lived before I moved here for 10 years. So
Oh, I love Chicago. I'm from LA, born out here, but my mother's family was all from either Chicago or Racine, Wisconsin, just outside. So I spent a lot of time in Chicago. I love it. It's beautiful.
great city. Yeah. So the final question, who in the classical world inspires you? I know Leo touched on talking about the LA Phil. So I just want to ask this question again, to both of you, who in the classical world inspires you guys?
For me, I think recently I'm not like a daily classical music listener. I dip in and out once in a while, and things catch my attention. One of those in the last few years has been James Rhodes. I believe he's a British pianist who he's still. I think he's on the young side, still in his young early 40s. But he was groomed early in his life to become a great classical musician, and I don't know the exact story, but he fell off track. He didn't fully pursue that life. I think he ended up somewhere in his early or mid 20s, being an agent, a talent agent, and it led him back around to facing unfulfilled potential, his own unfulfilled potential as a performer. And I think he also was struggling with mental illness for a long time. That was mixed in with how and why he went astray. And he, speaking of crossroads and moments, I think it was somewhere in his mid 30s, decided that he had to become the classical pianist that he was meant to be, and that somehow he ended up, he had ended up at this point in his life way off track, and he completely changed his life, rearranged his whole life to focus on that instrument for several years, really hardcore. And I've not seen or heard that much of what he does, but what I have seen is so gushing with that sense of purpose and vulnerability and appreciation for the little bit of time that you have to say something, to make something happen. I've found him very inspiring. I'm a huge Ravel fan, and I've seen him perform some of those works, and the videos that I've seen have been done in a very fresh, modern way, which I also really appreciate. So he is bringing a very inspired story to classical music. There's a modern feel to his playing and his philosophy about it, and just that he had to choose this. Like he had to kind of, in a way, I think, give up everything around him and choose once and for all, I have to do this, or I'm going to die. I'm going to go insane. I have to do this for my own well-being. I have to fulfill this potential. And it from what I've seen, it all comes out in his playing. So I think he's someone to watch out for.
Awesome. I'm going to check him out for sure.
Yeah.
James, one for you?
It's kind of hard. I mean, it's funny because when I think of the things that you think of when you think of sort of the cliche classical music, and I don't mean that as a pejorative, but when I think about the kind of classical music that I first heard as a kid, that they sort of thrust upon you, when you're sort of discovering, Bach and Beethoven or Mozart and things like that, these sort of robust Baroque composers. I don't think, for me personally, the only place I still find that work is in film. That's like a big thing for me. So if I'm looking for something like that, I go to film composers, because that's where the best place for that kind of composition now is in film. And when it comes to that kind of content, there's a composer named Michael Giacchino, who's pretty much become the go-to guy in Hollywood. But you listen to his compositions, and they're so sweeping, and they're so lush, and they're so dynamic. And he's done so much for film in the last decade. He's one of the few composers who's still creating themes, like legitimate themes, but also these fascinating suites that run through these massive epics, but then can also do really playful work for studios like Pixar. So when I think about that side of classical, that I tend to think of in terms of film, I think of Michael Giacchino. When it comes to what I would call just classical music now, like legitimate classical music that's not in that spectrum, I tend to look for the guys who are kind of like me, a little post modern. I can't think of a better way to describe it. So, because me growing up as a kid, my interests in music were so all over the place and so schizophrenic that the first bands that I really latched onto were the bands who weren't afraid to meld genre and style. And through a handful of different artists, I discovered some avant-garde composers who don't necessarily fit the classical bill, but they are composers in their own right, even if it's avant-garde or jazz. So that's how I discovered guys like John Zorn or Glenn Branca and even Philip Glass. But recently, there's a lot of younger guys my age, who are doing really fascinating melds of classical and avant jazz with inorganic music, blending electronic with classical orchestration and instrumentation. And, recently, like, I've been listening to this guy, Jeremy Zuckerman, who also does some film work, but as a solo artist, put out a record last year called Chaos, which I thought was great, which melds a lot of really great string and orchestral music with electronic and sound effects and soundscape work. There's another guy named Jarek Bischoff. I'm never sure if I'm pronouncing his name right, but he does the same thing. He put out a record called Cistern that really does a wonderful job of melding those two worlds, both electronic and classical, modern classical. And he worked with a woman named Amanda Palmer and did a really great sort of avant-garde string quartet tribute to David Bowie last year, which was a lot of fun. And there's a classical violinist who also does a lot of work like that, named Ivan Kang, whom I've been listening to for over a decade. So to me, it's that thing that I'm always looking for when it comes to modern composers, is this blend of beauty and provocation. And I'm getting that in a lot of those three guys' work recently, Kang and Bischoff and Zuckerman. So that's pretty much where I'm coming from on a lot of that modern classical music.
Tracy, the one thing I've learned is that you could never keep up with James's listening. He's just an amazing listener of music.
Really?
He's a huge asset to VSQ. He informs it greatly because of that expansive knowledge of music, both historically and what's going on today. And I don't know, maybe this just speaks to a larger point about collaboration and people coming from different backgrounds and different points of view. It struck me as funny as he was talking about what led him to his career, and that it was, a fair amount of circumstance or failing upwards, whereas mine couldn't be more different, which is very much deliberate, right? I went to music school because I wanted to make music, and that is what I was focused on. And there are deep truths in both of those stories. Like you have to realize what's in your heart and to follow it and be disciplined and work off of your instincts and have a vision for yourself. And then at the same time, you have to be open-minded and realize that your instincts need to be informed, and there are deeper levels to it. And then if you don't open up your mind, you'll just be stuck on maybe with one point of view, and it may limit you from reaching your fullest potential or realizing where your potential is or where the opportunities are. Even for me, like I don't think I could ever have expected to be doing what I'm doing now with VSQ at CMH, but I'm finding it fascinating, and it informs my music making, and working with people like James, I feel like is an incredible education to me as a musician, as a person, working with the whole VSQ team. And it's to get those other perspectives and points of view is such an important thing to do. And so I think that all of that is good to consider as a musician, especially classical musicians, to go out there and shake it up and let people challenge you and expose you to things you've never heard or would never willingly. I can't tell you how many bands like James has turned me on to that I was like, thank God someone told me to listen to this, because I just never would have gotten around to this. I don't operate like that, but what a great thing to have, lucky situation to be in. So, and that's just being open. That's just really just being open to it.
I would add that to your list of habits then, habits and behaviors. You listen to everything James tells you to listen to. That's my habit.
That has apparently been that's good advice here, I think. We've seen that meted out over time and time again, and I'll tell you, I'm really good at tooting my own horn. So, but no, and the flip side of that is, with Leo, because he has the background he has, because he has the formal training, but also because he's and don't take this the wrong way, Leo, I think I've mentioned it to him before, he's far more grounded in a lot of ways than I am. I have a lot more flights of fancy, and you need to have those people in your life on both sides. You need to be able to collaborate and find the people who it's like being in a relationship. If I was dating someone who was exactly like me, oh my God, what kind of relationship would that be? And a working relationship, professional relationship, and artistic relationship should be the same. You should find people who challenge you, who inform you, who will at times definitely even run counter to you, because you will start to, whether that's more grounding or whether that's more expansive, you'll find ways of bettering your work and your circumstances. Like that's what it really comes down to, is that's part of collaboration. If it was all the same people working together constantly, it'd be like just an echo chamber of monotony. You know what I mean? The best, right. You read up on like some of the best bands in the history of music, or the best collaborators in the history of art. And the reason they're generating something so great is because of the constant push and pull. They're never always on the same page, but then there's those moments where they completely line up in this discordance or even a disagreement. That's a big thing. Finding those people who challenge you and balance you out.
Yeah, and your ego is going to take a beating.
Yes,
but
mine does every day.
Or at least James's ego is going to take a beating. No, your ego, you're going to put yourself out there. Your ego is going to take a beating. And if that's happening, as awful as it feels, it's actually a good sign. It means you're in a good place where you are bringing something to the table. And there's something happening where you're learning. You're both offering something, but you're learning a broader perspective, and whatever you're bringing is being informed, maybe by a perspective that you don't need, but it's helping you to sharpen your point of view and your message. And maybe it turns out it's it's one that you want to adopt and grow into. But only good things can happen in that situation. But you have to put yourself in that situation over and over again. And when it feels really rough, and it will, just have faith that you're actually in the right spot. Just hang in there.
Right.
That's great advice. That's great advice for people who are looking to start something new and venture off into some unknown territory. So that was a great way to wrap up all the last 3 questions, actually. So that's really great. And I'm really looking forward to seeing what comes next for you guys, because it sounds like you have really awesome ideas. And personally, I hope you include a full orchestra, because that'd be really neat.
Cool.
Yeah, that could be a lot of fun. That could be a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Good to know if people are interested in that. That's, like I said, something we've definitely talked about.
Yep.
Cool. All right. Well, thank you so much for being on the show today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for
thanks
having us. Yeah, we love the topic here, the mission that you're on. I mean, just getting classical musicians into a podcast to talk about maybe podcasting and technology and how you reach people. That seems like a great thing to be doing. So we're kind of honored to be in on the conversation.
Thank you. And if everyone who's listening, if you're enjoying Crushing Classical as much as my guests are, please write a review on iTunes and come and join the conversation on Facebook at facebook.com/crushingclassical and on Instagram at Crushing Classical. And I look forward to seeing you again soon. And thanks for listening. Bye.
Bye.